everybody, and welcome to Megashift today. Today on the podcast, we have Sunny Israni, and so excited to have Sunny. And we'll be talking about one of the most important shifts happening in consumer software right now, in CPG software right now, how companies are automating and the coordination work that slows down small teams and figuring out how to allow consumer packaged goods companies to run like oiled machines. So our guest, Sunny Israni, is a four-time founder and engineer. He has over 15 years experience working across industries like tech, finance, and entrepreneurship. He's built products at Shopify and Bloomberg. He's even traded credit derivatives at Merrill. And he's taught classes on the topic of AI to MBAs at Columbia. And he's now even working on building out a personal AI and finance audience on social. So you're doing a lot of really amazing things. How are you doing today, Sunny?
I'm great. It's a rainy day here in New York, but I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. And so these days, Sunny, you're spending your time as a co-founder and CTO of Lightswitch, and you all are building agentic software specifically for the consumer packaged goods industry, consumer packaged brands and operators, so that they can automate the most painful processes that impact their business. And so we're going to dive into all that. So yeah, Sunny, tell us a little bit about what you're working on. What are you building at Lightswitch and why now?
Yeah, so one of the big realizations that we had, especially as we usher in this new agentic era, right, which is really like an enormous inflection point in just how work is done. But one of the things we realize is that because the pace of innovation in AI is so fast, right, everything's moving every 6 weeks, we're in 6-week cycles, that is resulting in a great divide of AI adoption. So our thesis is, why don't we actually teach and integrate some of these great, powerful technologies into industries that may not be necessarily on the cutting edge, specifically with software. So we thought that it would be physical industries, and we kind of looked at a lot of different industries, but specifically focused on CPG, specifically food and beverage brands. And ultimately, our goal is to help support these incredible founders who are so mission driven and just really believe in what they're doing, and really give them a fighting chance in competing at a level that they may not have been able to compete before, purely because of operational constraints.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's like, there's only so many people in these workforces. It might be a smaller CPG, it might be a larger, but it's like they're all trying to find efficiency so they can create more product, ship more product, stock more product, understand their supply chain, right? There's a lot of different use cases here.
Right.
And so it's like looking at how AI can kind of be embedded in those existing processes. And so that's your thesis. That's your thesis. And as you kind of test into this market and learn more about consumer packaged goods companies, what are you guys learning? Like, what are some of the misconceptions behind these automation mechanics, behind workflow processes? What are some of the things that you're finding counterintuitive?
Yeah, well, there's two things. Firstly, just purely on an adoption perspective, I think that when you are in the tech industry and maybe living on tech Twitter, or, and to some extent tech LinkedIn, you have this illusion that everybody knows about AI and everyone is like doing the latest and greatest. You even can make an assumption that, okay, well, the stuff that came out 6 months ago, everyone knows about and everyone's an expert at. And that could not be further from the truth. The fact is, there's so many people who barely know what Claude is. They don't even know that Anthropic is a company that owns Claude, even though they're like a very powerful company. And there's just this massive, just informational asymmetry right now that I've never seen before. There's always been informational asymmetry in the tech world, but it is particularly pronounced right now. Again, I go back to because the pace of innovation is so fast. So that's the first thing. Like, when you talk to someone who isn't necessarily so close to it, you have to really start from the basics, the foundations. Like, this is how these technologies work. I equate it to, it's like teaching someone about email in 1995, right? Like, email was going to transform the workforce, how we do things, how we communicate, but like we didn't really understand it, right? So it's like teaching that. So that's the first misconception. The second thing is, again, if you spend a lot of time on tech Twitter, or just like reading a lot of the news around AI, reading what a lot of these big influential CEOs are saying, there is this fixation on a fully autonomous world. This idea, this concept of a single person who's going to start $1 billion company just all by themselves, right? Like, that is this very provocative statement. Aside from the ethical considerations or humanity considerations on that, I think that is just the wrong thing to fixate on, whether it's true or not. Because the fact is, when you actually go into like the real economy, the real world, you realize that like you need people to make things happen. So what the focus needs to be on, which I don't think it is on, is how can we architect agentic systems that collaborate with humans. This human AI collaboration is really where the conversation needs to be, but it's not. It's usually in like this doomerism extreme kind of version of it, because I think that sells clicks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you shared is really valuable. It's like the first thing is that people aren't all as tapped in, especially some of
Mhm.
these older industries that
Yeah,
are all about like logistics and moving things from point A to B. Like, can't expect a person in the stocking,
yeah,
foreman, the factory foreman to exactly know AI. And like, not to assume they don't know, but yeah, just figuring out what those touch points of where it makes sense for their business. And then the second thing you shared is like, we want a human in the loop.
yeah.
And it's all about validating at each stage. You just don't want like a bot like doing everything. And so those are two really great insights. And as you're building out this technology and discovering your use cases, like what are some things that are coming up? What are some of the conversations you all are starting to have?
Yeah, I think, specifically diving into the CPG space, where, and this has been like such an education for me, as you mentioned, I started a couple of companies. This is like the first time in my career as an entrepreneur where I'm like going into a space I don't know much about. I've always really like leaned into things that I inherently knew about. And there's a lot of benefits with diving into a space you don't know about, because you have no assumptions. You have zero like pre-existing notion, zero bias, so you could kind of just like learn every single thing about it. So I am learning so much about just the American food system, how things show up on the shelf in your grocery, like just picking up, a protein bar at your local gas station. There's like so much, I would say, like warfare that happens to get on that shelf and to get in your hands. And I think the biggest realization, again, leads to what I was mentioning earlier, is there are so many industries like distribution, like the companies that are physically distributing goods, food and beverage goods, from the manufacturer to the retail locations, grocery stores, Whole Foods, gas stations. It is so physical, like it is so analog. I mean, sometimes it's just a bunch of guys on trucks with a clipboard. And I think that we really lose sight, even forget about AI, I think we really lose sight of how slow humans can be to adopt new technologies, So that was, I think, the biggest realization for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so are those, you know, as you connect with customers, like are you doing some field trips? Are you all doing a lot of interviews? What's your pathway into gathering
Yeah.
data and finding that product market fit?
Yeah, totally. because we don't have the domain knowledge in this space, we're fast accruing that domain knowledge. We are really, really leaning on user interviews and just like being where these brands are. Last week, we went to California to be at Expo West, which is a big food and beverage conference in the LA area. And just like talking to people and just being there, I think despite all the new technologies and all the change that is happening in the industry, there's always that like tried and true piece of wisdom, which is like you have to just talk to your customers. And I think there is in this industry like a resistance to talk to people. So you have all these like interesting solutions for it where it's like, oh, well, you can have a bunch of AI agents pretending to be different archetypes of people, and you can just get it researched by that. And that's it. That's all you need to do. But if you talk to some of the most successful and thoughtful founders, they will always say the best starting point is to have really deep and thoughtful conversations with users, not just checking the box, not just tell me about your problems or what do you think about this solution? Like you have to get in the weeds. And most people, humans, don't get to that level of granularity or that level of depth easily, right? We all have like the walls. So it is a really major art to like get into that.
Yeah, 100%. And just kind of double clicking on those interesting conversations, like any cool kernels of wisdom from that Expo West, or what you all are starting to explore based on those conversations, or kind of thinking about the product development life cycle, like anything that kind of is budding from those conversations or that you found compelling.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different areas that we're looking into, but I think like two areas that are particularly interesting is all of the work around managing and tracking inventory. It seems like such a simple thing, right? Like we've had inventory management systems for over 20 years. We've had good companies that do that kind of inventory management system, but like the process is still insanely manual. It's still PDFs, purchase orders, checking physical inventory, spreadsheets, a lot of spreadsheets. And I think there's something to be said about the fact that we have gone through 15 years of SaaS companies, like the VC ecosystem has invested so much in SaaS solutions. Some of them have been wildly successful, and yet spreadsheets are still like the dominant way of managing operations for so many companies. And it's not ideal. So I think one of the opportunities we see here is now if you have agents that can manage certain things, maybe it's something that can be certainly innovated and at least streamlined, because managing a bunch of spreadsheets, Excel documents like saved all over your computer and then tracking them against a PDF, like that is a waste of work. And that's kind of the work that we want to streamline and automate.
Nice. Yeah, the inventory and kind of everybody swarming on a spreadsheet. I feel like it's like similar in totally different industry, but yeah, event planning, right? It's like still it's just
Yeah.
like everybody needs a spreadsheet, and there's been a lot of cool innovation there. It's like for inventory and managing a warehouse or the front of house. What you shared kind of reminds me. Are you familiar with this article? Or so as you mentioned, Claude is a tool. It's similar to ChatGPT, and it runs on a model.
Yeah.
And there was some research where the team at Claude, Anthropic, was like seeing if a large language model, an LLM, could like effectively run a small vending machine and like basically keep it a closed loop where it was like tracking
Yeah.
the items and then ordering the items. Are you familiar with this?
No, tell me about it.
So yeah. Well, so I'll include it in the show notes. But yeah, so effectively, like Claude ran an experiment. The team at Claude Research at Anthropic, like basically, was just seeing if a large language model could like effectively track a vending machine and do all the different facets of it. It's really interesting because I'm pretty sure it ran amok and it was an agent and it like, made a lot of kind of logical fallacies and stuff. And so it's just kind of interesting because, there is some front bleeding edge research on that space, but, that's kind of looking at the whole
Yeah.
agentic system. I mean, like to go to market, I'm sure you all are just trying to target one, not the whole thing,
Right.
but definitely something interesting to take a look at, and we'll share with listeners
Yeah.
in the show notes. But yeah, it's kind of like, can autonomous systems, can robots understand the input and the output and
Yes.
check the balance of these items of or cases of beer or this or that, and look at the throughput. And so there's a lot of metrics in this space, as you mentioned. It's very physical,
Yeah, and
but
by
you're
the way, just to add on that, like what I'm seeing as the ideal agentic system for systems like this, it's a blend of three things. It's at its core, obviously, there's the intelligence part, which would be considered a probabilistic technology. But it's not just, oh, let's just give an AI model like things to do and tools. There's also like an additional layer of like deterministic scripts, like actually like pure Python scripts, pure if you do this, like if statements, right? That you have to layer on top of it so that way it stays controlled. And then the third component is a human, right? If you can have those three things, like to me, I think that's what like a really solid and durable agentic system looks like.
yeah, definitely like having those guardrails in place and
Yeah.
then the human in the loop for sure. Well, so yeah, you're kind of looking at these different facets of the consumer packaged goods. And so as you start to develop kind of prototypes or proof of concepts, you're basing these on customer interviews and really just trying to be data backed. I mean, you've done a lot of different types of companies, and as you share, you're kind of learning new because you're presented with a new industry. But what are some of those learnings that you're bringing over from your time running different companies, like an emotional well-being platform tied to financial
Yeah.
well-being, uh, and your time as an educator and as a trader? Like, what are some
Yeah.
of those kind of tried and true lessons that you're bringing to Lightswitch?
Yeah, I think like the biggest thing that I am trying to do differently this time, I would say, that's how I would frame it, is I am resisting the urge to build as long as possible. I'll explain that. So, throughout my career, specifically as a founder, certainly in my last company with Clasp, my personal finance app, and to some extent, previous versions, previous companies, because I am an engineer, I have this tendency to build, right? Let's just build something. It is my comfort zone. My favorite thing to do is to just like be obsessed with a product and literally spend 3 weeks without sleeping and just like build it. That is probably a sign of a past time now because now we have vibe coding. But still, I would just become so obsessed with building, and it was like my happy place. I loved it so much, and it just gave me so much like enjoyment. That is not that's you cannot build a business like that. Just because you could build a product doesn't mean it's the right product, doesn't mean people want it. This time around, I am resisting, and it does take a little like deprogramming, but I am resisting the urge to build, and I am just trying to live in the problem space. So that's like the one thing. And then if I feel like I need to do something, because sometimes it's like tough to just be sitting in research and just be super cerebral, especially for someone who's like execution driven like me. If I want to get my hands dirty, then I do some kind of marketing effort. So that could be some go to market engineering, or the thing that I'm super passionate about, which is my YouTube content, where I'm like, I feel like I'm actually doing something. I actually feel like there's things I'm actually putting out there in the world, which is a much better use of my time than actually building a product. Because there's a marketing component, like I'm getting potentially building an audience, but also even more than that, it's just like practicing, like talking about the problem and talking about these technologies and solutions, which just makes me like better positioned to eventually sell my product once we're at that stage.
Yeah, reduce that's great. Like reducing the what's the word? The urge. Yeah, the
Yeah.
urge to build and yeah, really understanding the customer, understanding the problem space. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, as you mentioned, like how has your background as an engineer kind of informed your research methodology? I think you spoke to a little bit earlier that you're really spending a lot of time with the customers, but like, you're kind of engineering this data gathering,
Mhm.
product validation, and there's a lot of literature on that, of course, but kind of like, day to day, what are you and your co-founder doing to make it feel sustainable and structure that
Yeah.
research sprint? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what's really exciting is the technologies now really lend itself to really amplifying your research efforts. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, there's like the camp of people who are like, oh, well, I'll just run my research through an AI model and the AI model will give me the research. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is now that we like now that we're doing all this research, every meeting is being recorded, every meeting is being transcribed. And now we can have AI agents actually reviewing the transcripts and helping us deconstruct it, not as a replacement to us, as a supplement. And that in of itself is worth so much. I remember when I started my third company class, I did over 100 hours by myself. I was a solo founder at the time. I did over 100 hours of just talking to people, and that was grueling because not only was it the talking, but it was also the reviewing and reviewing again, and then doing the sticky notes and trying to like figure out the themes and all my research. And I would say that was a very challenging process. And now we have all these tools that kind of is doing it for us, all that additional work. So that is like a game changer. But unfortunately, even though we have those technologies, and AI particularly is really good at like looking at a transcript and like summarizing and like structuring like broad themes, even though we have all these technologies, of course, like in the conversation, it always goes to, why do we even need to talk to humans? Like, why don't we just pretend to have fake AI humans and that'll give us our research? And I think that's just like too far. Like, that kind of misses the whole point.
Yeah, that synthetic research piece of like having a bot create 10 or 1,000 other bots and
Yeah,
te- testing a concept or a message can lead to some really skewed
it's
outputs, I
circular.
imagine.
It feels
Yeah, yeah,
circular.
yeah. Well, that's fascinating. And so, you're building this and testing into this space. You're also leading classes over at Columbia and then doing some online video education as well. So yeah, like how do you kind of approach that and what are some of the big topics that you like to tackle in your curriculums and in your passion of building out the YouTube space?
Yeah, I think so. I started at Columbia in 2022, just started with teaching a Python course for MBA students. So it's like supposed to be Python for, business use cases, not necessarily engineering use cases. So I was very drawn to the curriculum to begin with because generally something I've always believed is making technology more accessible to people who aren't necessarily going to be engineers. Now everything has changed, of course. Now it's less about like, oh, I need to learn Python because I need to learn how to write the code. Now it's more like I need to understand how systems think. So the challenge with doing content on YouTube and teaching my curriculum at Columbia is that we are in this period of destabilization around technology. So it's hard to really know what are the core skill sets that you really need to like hammer in at this time. There's also a tremendous amount of noise, and there is almost like this fixation on the tools, right? Like every 6 weeks, there is like a new shiny tool that everyone needs to learn. And the way that I approach it is I think in these periods of destabilization, it's much better value. And I think it will serve the learner more if we could just go up one level of abstraction and kind of give almost like a mental model on how to think about all of these AI technologies. So that's like something I really think about a lot. Another thing I think about is this. So I used to teach at Dev Bootcamp, and I went to Dev Bootcamp many years ago. And, if you look at what the boot camp space did, it basically made learning to be an engineer way more accessible to more people, because it went from I have to go and get a master's in software to now I can go to like a 9 to 12 week boot camp, and now I could like learn all the fundamentals. And that was tremendous for the industry, and that resulted in a lot of new people in the industry. And what it did is it basically like looked at all of the core foundations, the minimum viable amount of things you needed to learn. But it's still challenging. Now we have vibe coding and AI, which makes it even more accessible to more people. So this like label of technical versus non-technical is like blurring now. So what I'm thinking deeply about is, what is this new foundational understanding of technology? Like, what is the basic things that people need to know to direct AI systems? And more importantly, how do I articulate these things to someone that may not be like a technical person in a way that makes sense? It's like almost like developing like new language for some of these core technology foundations, because I actually think everybody should understand the very basics of technology, because it is such a driver in everyone's life. I think this should be as like natural as learning calculus. Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I just was saying that's fascinating. It's a really good approach to thinking about it. And so when you mentioned mental model, like this is a very large topic, so we can try to keep it brief, but like, so going into curriculum development or thinking about how systems work, like what are some of the kind of big three, big five things that you kind of lead with and help ground your students or ground your audience?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to give my students a shape of how a system could work, of how, especially an AI system, right? Like, you have a back end, you have a front end, you have a database, you have an intelligence layer. Like, these are the kind of broad like layers of a typical AI system. And I think everyone should have a good grounding of what that looks like and how that works, because it really does. If someone then goes and vibe codes something, now they are able to actually produce something that is nearing production level versus just going and just vibe coding, right? I can't tell you how many times I've had a friend or someone from my YouTube audience like approach me and said, "Hey, I'm like vibe coding this thing and I have no idea what I'm doing," because my earlier content was just like, let's vibe code an app. That was like all my videos. And then I realized quickly, I'm like, wait, no, people don't know anything. And I'm like, wait, actually, you take for granted all the things that like I know this stuff like so innately. And I'm like, everyone should understand what a database is. Everyone should understand what front end means and what backend means, and like generally how an LLM works. And that's the other thing. I do think everyone should understand broadly how a large language model works. And the third thing is, which is a shame that a lot of people don't know this, but I think everybody should have a basic understanding of how the internet works. Like, it's wild to me when I teach people how the request response cycle, the fact that we have fiber optic cables on the ocean floor connecting the entire internet. Like, when I tell people that, they think I'm like lying. They think I like made this up, but like that's literally how the internet works. And every single person in the world should know how that works, because it drives every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you mention it, because it's like, yeah, folks know that the sewer exists, and they know that how, but did you know, is somebody saying, oh, like this is how the faucet works, and there's water now in my cup? And I remember Uber had made the analogy that Uber wanted to make taxis as ubiquitous as running water, right? That you just have to think about it. And so yeah, definitely like kind of just understanding we're all connected by these wires and servers. And yeah, well, it's really, really great to kind of hear how you're testing into this space and blending your background as an educator and starting, a new venture, working on some, educational YouTube content, building out that channel. So yeah, it's been a really great conversation. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't had a chance to talk about today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for the listeners, the viewers out there, I think this is such a transformational time. I think there's a lot of reasons to be concerned, a lot of doomsday scenarios that we should totally take seriously. But also, there are a lot of potential positives that can happen. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that we now all have access to the same models that a Fortune 500 company has access to. If you have $20 to pay for a subscription, everybody has access to the same models. And that should be a very empowering thing. Like, you could build anything you want, you could do anything you want, and there's never really been a time in history that has been the case. So my biggest takeaway advice to everyone when talking about AI is just go in there and start building stuff and be curious.
Yeah, I love that. It's just like the being able to dive in, try new things, get your hands dirty, and learn the fundamentals. That's all great advice. And so, yeah, thank you, folks. We heard it here from Sunny, working on Lightswitch, looking to improve the state of things over in the consumer packaged goods space, and educating folks on how AI systems work and building and trying things out. So, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will catch you next time on Megashift. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.